All right, we're live. Welcome back to another session with your favorite crew who are talking about the things that you don't want to talk about because you can't, but we can. Welcome to Misaligned. Today's Easter special, bit different. Usually we tend to have a very specific kind of topic that we wish to talk about. Today we're going to be doing a little bit differently. We're talking about a few different general takes because it's Easter, and that's the time where we, look at a bit of reflection and look at the world and see what we
Talking
can
about a few
celebrate.
different.
So today we're going to start off with a video, which Farouk has very kindly put out for us to have a look at. And then let's kick off with that. Without further ado, I'm going to screen share. Um, Give me 1 second. Tell me if you can hear the audio.
He told you that Saddam had chemical weapons, that Gaddafi was a madman, that Assad gassed his people. Now they're telling you that Iran is nuking up. Well, they didn't tell you that Saddam was dumping the dollar, that Gaddafi dreamed of a gold-backed Pan-African dinner, that Assad switched to budgeting in euros, and that Iran.
We've got Hezbollah being funded by Iran, correct?
Correct.
We have Hamas being funded by Iran, correct?
Correct.
We have the Houthis being funded by Iran,
Correct.
correct? We got all the militias in Iraq.
Yes.
We now have dead Americans because of the money being going back to Iran, correct? All roads go back to Iran.
Well, not quite. All roads lead through Iran. Since ancient times, Persia has been a nexus of transport and trade. Slaves and spices, jewels and jade, gunpowder and gold. The Silk Road was a bridge between East and West. And Iran was the gateway. As then, so now. And just as there were bandits in the first century, there are bandits in the 21st century too. But instead of swords, they wield sanctions. And that has been the catalyst for Iran's renaissance, for its morphing into a linchpin of the new world order.
Maybe you can start with that. I think this is a fairly interesting kickoff point, and maybe we could just start off with initial thoughts off the back of that video. Farouk, you want to go first, seeing as this is
Yes.
particularly
Welcome to the Easter special edition of Misaligned. I think it's today with free styling, and I think that clip is an appropriate one for us to reflect on the most significant geopolitical event since we started Misaligned, and I would say that's the election of Donald Trump. And that clip made me smile because in the very early days of Donald Trump, I had we, myself and Jabs, had a conversation, and I would raise my hands up and admit that I was wrong, and he was right. My initial reading of Donald Trump was that he was in the very early days with his executive orders and approach towards Ukraine and outreaches towards Iran. Was my initial reading was that he was collapsing the empire and trying to consolidate and rebuild at home. Over the last 3 months, it's become apparent that on that specific case, Ijabla was right. It was all about China. It was all about doubling down on the empire, not collapsing it. It was all about re-strategizing to take on China, and that clip makes it apparent, which is why I thought we should play it today and talk about it. So, Jabs, well done. You read it right. Trump is not folding the American empire. He's not anti-war. He's not pro-peace. He's trying to isolate and ring fence and realign to take on China. And that's what that clip is all about. And further down, that clip is 20 minutes, well over 20 minutes. And I think RT did a very, very good analysis, bringing a lot of perspectives together. And the clip ends just about the point where it describes Iran as a linchpin for the new world order. Its resources, its position, geographically, and its sovereignty. So those are the key things. When you talk about geopolitics, it's about how you leverage your geography, you leverage your economic and political independence to your advantage. And that's where Iran is. Iran is right there in a place where those reshaping the landscape right now, meaning really China and Russia, can boycott the Gulf Arab states, can boycott NATO-controlled trade routes, and establish a trade route that is sovereign economically, militarily, technologically from the Western-controlled trade route, for which we all pay very heavily via the rents we pay to using their systems, via the sanction we pay for trying to be economically and politically independent, and via the bombs we face if we dare to stand up for our right and take a last stand. Thanks.
Do you think we should look at the last minute and a half of that video as a bit of a sort of summary point? Do you think that could be a useful segue?
Well, I mean, we can discuss this initial phase. Let's hear from Jabs, and then play it on and further reflect on it.
All right, Jab, you want to go for it?
Yeah. So thank you, Farouk. Yes, I remember we've had this conversation so many times, and I kept sending you messages every now and again when I kind of thought, Farouk, are you still holding on to this position? Look at this. And I remember that you kept saying that you were convinced that Trump was going to reduce the empires, where he was winding down the empire so that he can just be a local player in the Western Hemisphere. But I think my own position is that you have to, if you understand the 400, 500 years of the West, there is no way you can hold any position other than the fact that their sole economic system is one about hegemony. They want to stay at the top. Peak predation, because that's the only way capitalism, the system that they have built, can work. That is the only way. Anything else that threatens that hierarchy is an existential threat to them. That's what China is. And that's what everything else that you've got to just understand. It's all about trying to contain China, because if China succeeds, that is the end of the world as we have known it over the last sort of 400, 500 years. And there is bipartisan agreement on this one. It doesn't matter whether you put the Democrats or you put it doesn't matter what party is in. It doesn't matter what person is in that office. It is the foreign policy is one, and it's all about full spectrum dominance and unipolarity. Basically, that's American foreign policy. In fact, Western foreign policy in a nutshell. And with Iran, I would say it's the curse of geography. So geography is really very important. If you think about back in the days when people used to sort of like build fortresses and all that, you don't just go build a fortress just anywhere, right? You've got to look at the geography and think about its strategic position. So geography is really very important. It's the same thing with Africa. Like why did the slave trade happen in Africa? The transatlantic slave trade. Why wasn't it, let's say, in China or something? Well, it really is just geography. Africa happens to be the place that is closest to you. Cross the Mediterranean, you are in Africa. Massive continent, so much resources. It's really that. If a different race were there, let's say it was populated by a different race, it would probably have happened in the way that we know it, so different resistance and all that. So that is the problem I think that Iran has. Iran is what we call the Middle East is actually West Asia. And like they said in RT, it was like the highway connecting the East to the West. It's like a bridge, if you want to put it that way. So America has, or the West has, dominance over the sea, and what they're doing right now is they are putting sort of like almost naval blockades around the sea to contain China, because the whole idea is we don't want China doing well in terms of trade, so we will block it navally. So, but what is then China doing? China is now also doing what's called the Belt and Road Initiative. So they are building railways, they're building roads right across, Asia. To the idea was to bring it to Europe, as well as far as Southeast Asia. People should really, if you just type Belt and Road Initiative into Google and you look at the map, you'll see how ambitious China is. I really want China to succeed, because I feel that if China succeeds, the world is going to be a better place. I am really convinced about that. But because of that position, Iran now has to go. So it's kind of similar to what they did with Libya and Iraq, because they always use the pretext of, it's because of human rights abuses that's going on. That's why we want to go and take out these people. But actually, in both cases, Saddam and Gaddafi, it was because they were going to challenge the dollar hegemony. That is the reason why they had to go. And therefore, Iran is in a very difficult position. And I would argue actually that if Iran goes, that is going to weaken China and Russia. On that basis, I feel that it's in their interest to actually support Iran. But I'll let Cross
disagree, because I do.
Okay.
Right off the bat, I'm not certain, and I don't think there's any evidence for the fact that this entire escalation in terms of Trump's approach to foreign policy is a China-centric approach. I just don't see any evidence for it. What I see here is autarkic rather than it being targeted. Trump has imposed tariffs on at least 185 different countries, I think 186 at the last count. And even though a lot of those tariffs have kind of flatlined, so they've changed everything to 10% across the board, apart from China, who is the only country to have had the cojones to retaliate in the way that they have retaliated, because they are a peer. They're a competitor to America. They are the only peer and competitor to America from what I've seen. And I don't necessarily agree that there's this idea that the focus is really on China. America is trying to create a dominance on the world. It's not about China in terms of China being something special or China being anything different to the rest of the world. This is a ploy by America to assert dominance on a global scale. It's not targeted. I don't see any evidence for it, and I'd like to find some kind of evidence through this conversation about why that's the case.
Okay, so about Taiwan. Go on, Farouk.
I think the evidence is staring us in the face. Pronouncements by Trump himself, by Marco Rubio, by Hesketh, by Joe Biden, by the G7, describing China as a threat to their interest. The UK has formally described it as a systemic threat to Western life. So I think the evidence is there. The acknowledgement from the highest
threat as an enemy.
There's acknowledgement from the highest political and military level in the West that China is a threat.
Is this linked to Trump's presidency? Are we talking? Because
no. So now we're discussing the broader Western approach, Western policy towards China and Western hegemony. And I think Jabs made a very good point where he says there is bipartisan agreement. It doesn't matter if it's Trump or Biden, as long as it's China, as long as it's hegemony, as long as it's remaining the top gun. Trump has a very disorganized way of approaching it, made many things clear, and has changed a lot in terms of how allies and adversaries feel. But in terms of the foreign policy direction and whether or not China is a threat, I think there's acknowledgement at the highest political level, at the highest military level, at the highest economic level, even by Western leaders, the head of the Federal Reserve, the NATO chief of staff, that China is a system.
Yeah, but that doesn't address my point. My point is specifically about the foreign policies that are being enacted, being targeted at China the Iranian conversation is an interesting one. We can probably go, get into that in a bit more detail. But specifically about China is my own challenge and my pushback here. That I'm not seeing anything in terms of the actual foreign policy being implemented that focuses on China itself being a threat. The only thing I've seen that comes even close to that has been the current set of tariffs, which have only occurred because China was the only country that had the cojones to say, America, we don't care about that. F you, we're doing what we want to do as well.
So
I'm
let
not
me
seeing anything in global.
let me highlight three specific policy pronouncements and action Trump has undertaken in the last 3 months. Number one, Panama Canal. They've been very specific and loud about the fact that they want to deter and they deter China. They want to take over the control of the Panama Canal from China, and they would don't want Chinese influence there. BlackRock initially made a bid to buy the Panama Canal, and I think the Hong Kong tycoon who owned it was blocked by the Chinese government from selling it. A few days later, Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, was in Panama and signed a so-called cooperation agreement with the Panamanian government to protect freedom of navigation, as they say in quote. But they must have been bullied into signing whatever was done then. How do we know? We saw the way the Ukrainian president was bullied publicly. And we discussed this on a previous episode of Misaligned. So that's one specific example of how they are taking on China. A second one, which is also direct, is Pete Hegseth again, was in Philippines, where they announced live naval drills, where they are deploying and selling new weapons, and where they are stoking further tension, specifically saying they want to counter China. Thirdly, Taiwan, they've sold new fighter jets to Taiwan. They still remain officially in their policy ambivalent as to whether there's a one China policy or Taiwan is independent. So those are three specific steps they've taken in the last 100 days that points to the fact that they are serious that this is about China. The matter of Iran and the clip we just played isn't direct, but it's a reading of their policy, their history, and the position of Iran in the geopolitical space. Who are those shaping the future of our world today? There are three of them: Xi Jinping of China, Putin of Russia, and the Americans. And who are their allies? Who has helped? And what are the broad groups? So you've got the Chinese, the Russians, since the Ukraine war increasingly so, but even before then they were getting closer and closer. The Iranians and the North Koreans and the wider BRICS, the Indians. That's one group, and then you have the group we call the West. So now taking on I think the point in the RT clip we watched there is trying to make us understand the role Iran plays, even though as a junior partner in shaping that alternate landscape that will usher in a new world order, a new way of doing things, new trade routes, new technology routes, new currencies, and why it is important, why Iran is critical to be taken out. Once, as Ijabla says, if Iran is taken out under the guise of anything, it weakens China and Russia. It weakens the alternative pathway. And I wouldn't describe them as psychopaths. I would describe their policy as psychopathic. They will drop a bomb to achieve whatever they want to achieve. Jabs,
no. I think they're psychopaths. I don't know why you're scared of saying it. No. I genuinely believe so. To answer Cross's question, I mean, if you have been watching the television, that question is really obvious. It's not. They say it all the time. If you hear any American official talking, it's always China. Before they make a sentence, they've mentioned China like 10 times, right? So it's not what we're not like trying to be even conspiracy theorists here. They say it all the time. They say China is their biggest threat. China is the only country that has the ability to challenge their unipolar hegemony. They describe China as an enemy. So it's the collective West. You hear the EU saying that, Ursula von der Leyen, you hear British PM saying this, you hear it from Trump and his entire team. So we're not they tell us that. They say this repeatedly. It's about trying to contain China. China is the threat that they're concerned about. So just put it this way, because initially I was talking about, when they talk about our way of life, what they're talking about here is a system, because we live in a global dictatorship. Okay, so we've got a system called capitalism, which is a system that rewards greed, and it's a system that is parasitic. And I'll explain what that is, because in biology you hear about parasitism and you hear about symbiosis. So symbiosis is like a win-win relationship. A parasite is a parasite is please help me find a word for it.
It's an organism that.
Yes, okay, so it's an organism, yes, that sits on the host or lives in the host and takes all benefit the host gets. In fact, it harms the host. That's what a parasite is. That is a system that we've got, and this is a system that, for whatever reason, that the West has chosen. And in this system, they stay at the top, and this is how they've structured the world. So whether you're talking about the era of the transatlantic slave trade, or colonialism, or neocolonialism, which is where we are under, it's a system whereby they have structured the world such that Africa stays right at the bottom. The West, Caucasians the West stay right at the top. And then the other races are somewhere in between. And therefore, Africa will not be allowed to escape from this position where it is. We really have to understand that, because I think people don't understand this and they get so confused, and they talk about, why is Africa at the bottom? It's because of corruption. It's because we're lazy. We don't know what to do, and all of those things. It's none of those. It's basically a system whereby people who are stronger than you want you to stay there, and you do all the donkey work, all the heavy lifting, and they sponge off you. That is the system. Africa cannot escape that role that has been assigned to us. So to recap, that role is, we produce the raw materials, human resources, natural resources, and we are not allowed to industrialize. Next thing is, the product that we produce, whether it's humans or the raw materials, go to the center or the metropolis. It's refined in the industries, and then it's brought back to us. So we are allowed some degree of prosperity, because obviously, if there is no prosperity, if those products come back, you will not be able to buy them. But they want the markets. And when they talk about markets, they're talking about population, humans, the number of people. So if there are billions of people, that's a bigger market. If there are only 1 million people, that's a smaller market. If there are 10,000, that's a much smaller market, right? So they finish these products, they bring it back to places like Africa so that we can consume them. And then once they are done with any technology, right, we become the dumping ground. So they dump all those obsolete technology. They don't want us to have high-end technology and to compete with them. No, we only stay. So in the case of Nigeria, so we stay with Tokumbo, if I can use it that way. We keep all the new cars about, EVs and all that. So that is the role. And yes, we can talk about Kagame, this person, that person. You can, maybe take 1 or 2 examples, but that's nothing. They can destroy Kagame tomorrow, like they've done with Libya. Libya was once upon a time the most prosperous country in Africa. Its people were very prosperous. They had education. They had, good, excellent healthcare. They had good roads. They had electricity. Infrastructures. They had. Where is it now? It's a slave market. So destroying is really not a problem at all. Building is the problem. So that is the position where Africa is. And then, like I said, there are all the other countries in between. And because colonialism isn't one thing, it's different things in different places. So that's the structure that has been laid. The only country, well, not the only country, I think Russia is challenging that, but I think the only country that has the ability to challenge its hegemony is China, because of the system that it's It's adopted. It's very friendly. It's lifted almost 1 billion people out of poverty without colonizing people, kidnapping people, stealing people, firing shots, nothing. It doesn't interfere in the domestic affairs of the country. It comes around and it says, right, let's sit down, let's do business. So it's attracting, it's got friends all over. It's the biggest trading partner of most countries in the world. And it has nuclear weapons, so it's a pair competitor basically, and America cannot allow China to succeed, because if it succeeds, it destroys this system that I've just described that they've built. That is why China is the success of China is an existential threat to the capitalist system that has been constructed by the West. And we will remember that in finishing, Karl Marx did mention about the internal contradictions of capitalism. I feel that actually all those predictions that he made, and Farouk, you would know that we have a prof on the group who is always making fun of Karl Marx and being like, oh, the end of history and all of that sort of thing. But I genuinely believe that this is a time that Karl Marx has predicted. The reason China has prospered is because capitalism wanted to use China to produce cheap resources, didn't think that China was going to be able to acquire this high-end technology and compete with them. So that is where we are, and that is why China is an existential threat. And I think for the rest of the global South, we better really hope and pray that China succeeds, because I think that is the interest of the citizens of the world.
That's all. That's great. And you've raised a number of different issues, and maybe this is one of the reasons why sometimes I like to just jump in, because it's easy enough for us to go down the rabbit hole in multiple different areas. But there's a couple of things. So some things were raised earlier by Farouk around proving America's interest or focus on China, and I disagree with quite a couple of them. So the first one is going back to my original point about America's current actions around the tariffs are autarkic. They aim to reduce trade. If you want to have China to have power and you're fighting China, you do not increase barriers to you having trade with other countries. You would increase your barriers to China specifically and reduce them to other countries in order for you to take control on power. That's number one. The second, two other things that were raised were around the naval drills America has done, specifically around China. That doesn't really mean anything to me, because America always does naval drills, and they do army drills, and they do air force drills. They do drills all the time, all over the place, everywhere. And I think in 2024 there are at least 8 or 9 different naval drills, or I think military drills. I think someone can correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but they did at least 8, 9, military drills across the world. The other thing was about fighter jets. Well, fighter jets are sold to all of American allies and even non-allies as well. NATO, I think it's at least 19 different countries that have been sold American fighter jets over the past 5-10 years. So again, that doesn't necessarily mean anything to me as well. The other bit about it is that, well, it's obvious when you look at the news. Well, I don't think so. I don't necessarily agree that mainstream media is currently giving us the information that we need. I think the current mainstream media is quite biased if you look at the different ones. You look at even over the past 10-15 years. Let's go back to Brexit as a good example. We had the Daily Mirror and the Sun having completely polarized views about the exact same thing. Daily Telegraph and the Guardian were slightly more intellectual in theory, were giving us some complete garbage in terms of all the different logic and the different things that needed to be done across that. I don't trust the current media. You go even all the way down to CNN. It's complete absolute garbage, leftist nonsense when you look at that. I consider myself to be, which is funny because I used to be left-wing. But now people will consider me to be a right winger when we think about all these things, because the Overton window has shifted. And now what was considered to be centrist previously is probably considered to be far right. And things that were left wing are right wing as it stands. But my view about that is, yes, I don't trust the media. I think the media has a lot of garbage and is designed to influence quite a lot of things. Even when we talk about the different, like to the point that was raised about what was obvious was, it's obvious that China is the target. So it's like, well, no, that's not necessarily the case. If you think about media and all the different political, not necessarily, not even political, the different political figures in government that have come out to talk. They've talked about Russia, they've talked about Iran, they've talked about Iraq, more historically speaking, Afghanistan, Syria, even more recently, Canada, where Donald Trump was calling the Prime Minister of Canada a governor, and they're talking about annexing the entire country. So I don't necessarily buy that piece either. Going back to the next bits of pieces around capitalism, I think I agree with you around capitalism, around the parasitism approach that's being taken. But generally, as a concept, capitalism is parasitism. It's designed to be parasitic in itself. Those who are able to wield the most power and resources generate the most returns and have the most power. It's just what it is. It's not a new thing. It's not focused on the West, because I think, Jab, you're focusing on the West in this concept. I disagree. I think this is how we've always been. Slavery itself is capitalistic, if you think about it. It's about harnessing the most resources to gain your own personal benefit that you want. Slavery was natural, in my view. It's a natural course of action that we've all gone through as humans. And this is proof. This is evident in the fact that slavery occurred across all cultures, independent of each other. We all went through slavery. Why did we do it? It's because it's part of human nature to exploit either others or exploit the resources available to us. The things that you said as well, you said Africa, I agree with you. Africa is a dumping ground. Africa being relegated to being a producer and then having sufficient income to be able to buy things back. I agree. I think that's perfectly correct. But that's also tied back into the capitalistic nature of society and how the world operates. I think the last thing that you raised that I again disagree with is about how China doesn't interfere in geopolitical, and I think that in itself is almost oxymoronic, to be honest. It doesn't even make sense in itself. China is such a massive player that to say China is not involved in geopolitics and getting involved in political things and just walks around is smiley, happy-go-lucky with everybody else, I think it's almost looking at China like a child. China is the exact same thing as America. They just don't have the exact same kind of power. They're not focusing on militaristic power, which is what America is focusing on. They have the power and the might, and they have the economy, but China is creeping pretty damn close in terms of being able to compete from that perspective of foreign aid and using the financial capabilities to influence external players. They just don't have that firepower. China is the same. Give China the same firepower, they will behave this exact same way. Humans are humans. Going back to the point that I raised about slavery, humans are humans, and humans will always behave the same way that they are. Finally, wrapping that up before we jump into the next video that Farouk has very kindly shared, it's just the fact that for me, I think the idea that we're focusing on China as being this big bad boy, on America being this big bad boy, being this big bad beast that's trying to take down the good, very capable, loving, sweet China that's there to save everyone's dreams, is fallacious at best. And at worst, it's probably likely to just cause more issues, because the reality is they're all the same. And with that, if there's no rejoinder, we could jump into this video and then maybe come back to any additional points just so we progress along, because we've only got about 18 minutes left in this broadcast. If you're Farouk, all right with that.
Farouk, do you have a rejoinder? Because I just wanted to say one or two things. Farouk?
Farouk's frozen. You can go for it. Go for it. We'll catch Farouk.
Okay, Farouk is frozen. So he's alive again.
Yeah, Jab, yeah. You go on.
Yeah. Okay.
So my rejoinder,
yes,
to AK's comment, we'll take it. It has to be well considered. But let me just say this: after 3 to 5 centuries of narcissistic, psychopathic behavior by scavengers and parasites, they've made the abnormal become the norm. They've brought us up in an era where the tyrants, the military powers, the strong are the ones who are threatened. They are the ones who have interests. They are the ones who want safety. So that's why they've made us think that to live and exploit and extort is the norm. That is not correct. And evidence is bound. India pre-colonialism had, as they say, 25% of the world GDP, one of the wealthiest places on earth. They lived sustainably with a textile industry. What did the capitalists and colonialists do? They went there and taxed the farms, moved industry back to the UK mainland, extracted cotton and dyes, made them up, and then sold back to these people they've taxed. They killed the industry there. They robbed the people, they robbed the economy. These are people that have lived sustainably for thousands of years. Same as we read with the Inca civilization in North and South America. These people had millions of heads of buffaloes. They were a civilization that had their way and lived sustainably. You hunted down the buffaloes, introduced extraction, impoverished the people, and enriched another person. So this notion of prosperity at the expense of others is not normal. The notions of trade, entrepreneurship, profit-making are normal. That's not capitalism. Capitalism is a very virulent and destructive form and evolution of this concept. I think a lot of people, because, I mean, the classical description of capitalism by Mr. Smith from the UK talks about capital, labor. That's not what we are talking about. Our ancestors had market days. Our ancestors trade. They knew that work, industry, entrepreneurship, and trade matters. But they also understood sustainability. They understood balance.
Cooperation.
And they understood cooperation. They had win-win arrangements. This notion this notion and system of unlimited growth, unlimited profits, year in, year out, at the expense of wherever these resources and labor is coming from. It's new, it's psychopathic, and it's unnatural. There is another clip. It's a day of clips that I have sent just now. Again, addressing your issue about whether China is like the West. It's a rhyme, it's a joke, but the author in that clip put it very poetically. So my response to Cross's talk about, oh, China is like the West, is to play that clip for us right away, and then we can move to jabs. So the most recent clip about how China has evolved the best model in the last 500 years. Please play that. Thank you.
All right, let's jump into it.
So at this point in the trade war, you might be asking yourself, why did the U.S. want to pick a fight with China?
There is no...
Hi, Cross. Hi, Cross. Hello, Cross.
Yep.
Integrated.
Not this one. There is one the latest one I just put on the group. This, you will play this afterwards.
Gotcha. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So this talks about why China has been taken on. We can play this after Jab speaks, but there is one I just put there that is about the various models of extraction and empire, how empires have
and you just shared it. Okay. Yep,
manifested themselves. Have you seen it?
Yep. Let me just pull that out. Give me a second.
Thank you.
So whilst he's looking for it, what I want to just say is that, so Cross, I think that what we're doing here is projecting Western values upon China. If you want to organize a society, there are different ways to do it. Okay, so mythologies, and one way is religion, because we covered this in a different podcast where we talked about the value of religion, and I was saying that religion can be used to organize societies. Other people have something different to religion. So in China, they've got a doctrine called, doctrine or mythology, doctrine, if you want to call it that way, philosophy, maybe it's a better word, and it's called Confucianism. And this emphasizes balance. It's a totally different mindset to, I think the West really does not understand China, or they are projecting their own values upon China. China is governed by a totally different set of values. And when you said this is the way life has always been, that is this extraction. But you can look at China. You know, which country has China? Which people has China gone and bombed, or overthrown their president, or sacked the country? Give me an example. They haven't yet. They have
Okay.
surpassed the West, the collective West, in terms of development. So no, I disagree with you. It's not always the way. This is the West. You can't understand the world we live in if you don't understand Western history. It really is very important that everybody goes and understand Western history, because if you do, it gives you an idea of why the world is the way it is. But it does not mean that that is the only way. So there is a different way, and cooperation is really very important. So I'll let you play this clip because I need to come back to one or two other points that you made.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just quickly I'm going to throw this on, and we need to respond to the comments as well. But the first thing is the direct response to your point there is, and this actually, funny enough, this ties into the comment. So let me just read the comment first from T Jones. So T Jones goes, Oga Cross, judge a man, bracket country, by his actions, and the truth will make itself known to you. You can't say America and China are the same when the actions and approaches are completely different.
I agree with T Jones. T Jones, I agree with you 100%.
100%.
He has another comment. So his second comment was, we can't judge China by what they might do, but we can judge them by what they're currently doing, and the same thing applies to America.
Absolutely.
God bless you, T Jones. I'm glad people are beginning to see beyond the smoke screen. This is what the man who has dropped a nuclear bomb twice on non-military targets will tell the world, and the world will believe that, hey, let them not have nuke because they will use it. I mean, make it make sense.
Yes.
The same man who is threatening to drop a bomb on Shanghai, to blow the TSMC if Taiwan is taken, is saying that person should not have a nuclear bomb because they've used it.
Yes.
The only people that have used a nuclear bomb twice on civilian targets are the ones telling us this. They are the ones telling us it's normal to exploit and plunder and commit genocide. In the last 100 years ago, in the last century alone, genocide is in Namibia, in Congo, in Germany, in Gaza. The same people, but they make you believe that it's your brother that is a genocider. They make you believe that it's your brother that is a threat to them.
Okay. So a thing I needed to point out to answer the initial thing was one, and I'm going to jump into this, is the idea about
quick question, please, before you go in. Sorry, you mentioned Trump putting tariff on other countries. Let me just explain, because there is a
just before you go, because I'm going to completely lose my train of thoughts. let me just address this really quickly. The first thing, the idea about we've got 3 to 5 centuries of parasitism and barbarism, essentially, that changed the way we behave, is just completely untrue. When we think about India, we've talked about India and how India is such a it's the same kind of, we're almost doing the cotton thing, how humans are very soft, nice, amazing creatures who only do good things. It's just completely changing the history of the world. Classism. Let's not even go into slavery in India, because that is already a known thing across all areas of the world, including India. But classism is still a thing, where the people who are significantly lower in sociocultural class, from even socioeconomic class as well, from others, even in India today. I'm not even talking about 100 years ago, and that has nothing to do with the West. The behaviors of humans still remain consistent and constant. There are people at the top and the people at the bottom, and we treat them all differently. I'm not even going to go into, because we're running out of time. So I just want to just point that out. The other thing was to the point around T. Jones's comment, and this ties into the other thing that both of you were saying as well about, America, China hasn't done this, therefore America has, therefore, China is probably a better thing. It's like the reality is there are multiple instances in which we allow people to show themselves after the fact rather than before it. Well, with an expectation of your performance post action, post endowment, etc. There are people who become rich. When people become rich, they tend to change their personalities and their behaviors and show themselves in different ways. We have more clear instances of where people's behaviors and their performance is not the current performance is not a predicator on what we expect them to do later on. For example,
Why-
promotion.
why-
One
no,
second,
hang on.
one
Why
second.
do-
Wait.
why
Let
do
me
states-
just give you examples. We've got promotions. People get promoted in jobs. Their performance of that future job is not predicated on the previous performance in the current job that they're in. That future job has a different job specification, and we're expecting them to do something differently based on how we've assessed them, their personalities and the competencies. It's the same. I'm looking at China. We look at things like marriage. Same thing happens in marriage. Contracts that we sign for development of different things that we do that are required, whether it's services or products, etc. In some cases, you have no expectation or no previous experience that you can look at. It's the same way I'm looking at China. I'm saying China is not behaving like a big boy.
You're making a very tenuous point. Play the video.
Let us really land it, and then I'll play the video. But it's a very important thing to understand that the fact that China is not doing it right now doesn't mean that China is not going to do it if they get to that position of power. That's the key thing I want to point out, that we shouldn't look at China as China is this nice, benevolent, very soft, sexy country that's going to do all these lovely things for everybody, but America bad. Let me just play that video right now, jumping straight.
I'll respond to that after the video.
Of course. So the video is going now. Give me 2 seconds. And we have a video. Ready? Do you see my screen?
Yeah.
Let's go.
Trump is removing the U.S.
No audio. No audio. We didn't have audio there.
Just let me know if you've got audio now.
We've got audio now.
Okay.
What is China going to do? He tells us, because when you know history, the future is not a mystery. The first modern world leaders were Spain and Portugal. Kill, conquer, plunder, genocide, and gold in the name of Jesus. Not a great model. Turn the page of history, and Britain and France are the controllers. Colonize, control, exploit. They didn't burn your village. They made you run it for them. Still not a great model, but I'd rather be told what to do by the British than selected by the Spanish. Then came the US. Trade, topple, profit. No need for colonies when you've got Coca-Cola and coups. Trade on American terms, or they overthrew your government. That's not an ideal model, but it's better than the Spanish or British. And China. Build, bind, control. No violence, no coups, just ports, railways, fiber optic cables. This isn't conquest, it's connectivity. It's connectivity with strings attached. They don't invade, they invest. There's still control. They own the ports, the roads, the data, but it's the best model in 500 years. And it's what's next.
All
right.
Cross. That's a very rhymey, joking way to put it. When the Chinese build roads and bridges, when they build ports and they loan you money, they are exporting the surplus production of their people. We are not naive. They have interests. They want to have a say. They want to have influence. They want to be the big boys. They want to control. They are powerful. They are rich. That's not what we're talking about. We are comparing them to what we've had and what we have. No one is arguing that the Chinese are saints. No one is arguing that they've not got sovereign interest. We are saying they are not toppling governments. They are not bombing other people. They are not invading. They are not interfering. That's what we're saying. And that's the summary of what the chap is saying there. It's the best model we have evolved in 500 years. Does it mean we still don't have slaves in parts of Africa and parts of the world? Does it mean there's still no injustice? Of course there is. When you say, you were in your last comment, you're talking about what China would do when they get there. China is already there.
But they aren't.
They're already there. They are the second largest. They're the second largest economy in the world by nominal GDP. They are the largest by purchasing power parity. They lead in AI. They lead in several key aspects. They are the biggest trading partner to most of the world. They have one of the top 3 most powerful militaries on earth. They are nuclear armed. They're not bombing and invading people. They have sovereign interests.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in spite
Okay.
of
So
that,
it's really about, like T. Jones says, what are they doing in the moment? Are they behaving like Turkey? Are they behaving like France? Are they behaving like the UK? Yet they are stronger than all these countries. France still destroyed half of the Ivorian Air Force in our lifetimes.
Okay.
UK and France were still involved in bombing Libya in our lifetime. Is China doing that?
Okay.
So
we
waiting
have a
until we
comment.
get to some place in future, I think we can judge based on what we see now. We can't talk about the future.
there's a very good comment by T.
we got a
Jones.
comment. Yeah. Exactly. Go
So
ahead.
and I totally agree with him again. He said, Oga Cross, you're kind of calling us wife beaters, even though we haven't beaten our wives and have no plans to. I mean, that is brilliant.
That was funny. I laughed about that.
That is brilliant. That is brilliant. That is
I mean,
brilliant.
I'm going to answer this one because it ties into what I'm saying again. Because if we even look back at the history, I mean, Mongolians are a subsect of China.
No way! Don't do that. Don't do that.
But I am going down that route. You know,
Don't do that.
If you go back to the historicity of it, there's a lot of violence, and one of the most violent kinds, or one of the most violent instances we've seen in history of expansionism has come from that area. So,
well,
in
case you don't know, the Mongols first invaded China before they turned west. In case you don't know,
that blood is there. I'm aware. But that blood is there. Genghis Khan was very, very, very generous with his donation of seed across the entire area. And I think an important thing is understanding, and it's not really about the Mongolians. I'm using that almost as a bit of a hyperbolic sort of example about it. But the reality is humans tend to behave like humans. So Americans are not significantly. 1 second, give me a minute. Let me land it. But it's not. Humans are humans. Chinese are not so significantly different from the Americans, who are not significantly different from the Nigerians, who are not. Everybody does power plays. China cannot. One of the reasons why China will never directly deal with these kind of situations, especially militaristically, is because of the allies. There's no NATO for China. China has very limited allies in strategic areas, and they're not able to lift as much muscle. That's one of the biggest reasons why they do not do all these kind of incursions. Russia was one of the countries. Let me land it. Give me 30 seconds. 30. One of the reasons why Russia was also spoken about as one of the peaceful countries that very rarely did anything until they did the 2015 incursion. Then more recently, people are now saying, well, maybe Russia is actually able to do some military incursions. It's because they've been pushed to the point where they've decided to deploy that militaristic might to deliver the things that they want on their own objectives. If China finds the objectives that are necessary for them to deliver using militaristic might, they will use them. This is my point. I'm not saying that China is bad and they're going to do exactly the way do things exactly the way America or Europe has done their own version of doing things, but they're capable of it. And if it favors them, they will deploy these tactics. That's the main thing. This favors America, which is why America is acting in this way. But go on now.
I will highlight 2 points. Jabla has pointed to one: philosophy and history. Jabs, I promise you, I won't do that. Philosophy and history. What thinking and what values and what ideas underpin a way a people behave? The Chinese tell us about Confucius. Okay. The West tells us about anyway. They tell us about Machiavelli. Okay. All right. So that's philosophy. The 48 Art of War, the famous Chinese, the Art of War, the famous Chinese writer, talks about the supreme art of war being winning without violence, winning without fighting. These are the people. Yeah, that's the supreme art of war, to win a battle without having to fight.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
it doesn't mean you don't fight.
Well, through essentially, I'm just trying to look back at how a people are, how they think, what their disposition to life is. Humans are violent, human fight. As far back as several centuries BC, Alexandria from Macedonia invaded a lot of the known world, declared himself the king of Egypt, the king of Persia, the king of the Indus. So also Napoleon years after, Hitler afterwards. You talked about Genghis Khan. We've had very violent people. Humans are violent. And thankfully, as civilization has evolved, we found ways of curtailing ourselves. Things like international law, the UN, which obviously is been rubbish now as we speak in Gaza. But I think we can look at how people have behaved, what's their disposition, what's their philosophy, what's their culture, and to predict what they would do. There's a point Yemi made on the podcast several seasons ago, and that the way people behave is about them, they're also about their environment. And then we talk about how multipolarity and having nuclear weapons can curtail people. So China is definitely behaving because of their philosophy and history, but also because of their environment. I think we're in a place in the world where people are armed enough and they can defend themselves. I don't see anybody walking into India now to colonize them for 300 years. It won't happen again because they are aware and they've armed themselves. So the environment kind of helps in shaping how people behave. But I think we have enough information to trust that the Chinese are who they've told us they are.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in modeling into the future who they may be. Certainly not being told by the ones that have dropped 2 nuclear weapons on children, women, and cities that another person is more violent or will be more violent than them, or will be like them. Thank you.
I'm keen on us getting to. Should we get to? Sorry, Jab. Well, I'm just looking at the clock, and today we kind of really wanted a hard stop. I just wanted to just check. Should we just move to last thoughts? Do you want to give your final thoughts there, Jab, and then we'll move to last thoughts on the topic, and then we prep for the next episode.
Yeah. Okay. So I think what I want to say is it's what the argument you've been making, Cross, is one where you are saying that. Actually, let me turn it around. It's like someone saying, Cross, you are potentially a bad person because you're going to kill somebody. You could kill somebody tomorrow. You could murder your wife or something along that sort of reason, right?
If I take steroids and I start going to gun ranges,
let me land, please.
Guns at home, and I start behaving in ways that
please let me land.
Lead to that, then yes, agree. Go on.
Yeah. No. So the thing is that you have to look at what has actually happened or has transpired. And like Farouk said, the people who are sowing these ideas about China is your enemy, because when you hear them speak, they talk about how China is the enemy of the West. They don't explain how China is the enemy of the West. Who has China invaded? Nobody. Has China bombed on any country? No. Has China overthrown any country? No. Has China enslaved people? No. Has China colonized any persons? Have they been in Africa to colonize? They haven't done that. In spite of that, they have become this phenomenal force that we know about today without committing any of these atrocities. What does that tell us? It tells us that the West has a choice. All this murder and the overthrowing and the destabilizing countries and invasion, they have a choice. They don't have to do it. It can be done. You can prosper by cooperation, by win-win. That's what China is demonstrated. That's why China is an existential threat to their system, because they kind of think people are going to look at China like we are doing now and saying, actually, there's another way of becoming a superpower without destroying other people, without destroying civilizations, right? There is a choice. So this thing they are doing is not because there is no choice. It's not because that is human nature. No. That is their philosophy. So it goes back to values. Those are their values. The Chinese have a different value. And they have proven to us that actually it's possible to build, it's possible to become this economic powerhouse without actually destroying, right? So there's a saying that China builds and the West bombs. It is true. It comes down to values. So the last point I'm going to make is in relation to, you said that you didn't think that China was these tariffs were not about China and all of those things. because they've been imposed on other countries, but only China retaliated. So I think that there is something about the style that there's some reason to Trump's madness. This is what I think is going to happen, right? So he's imposed all of these tariffs on all these various countries. What he's trying to do is to decouple the American economy from the Chinese economy. Will he succeed? We will see, but I don't think so. So he's trying to decouple it. And what he's trying to do is to isolate China. So he's imposes tariffs on all these other countries, because you question why, you know, if he's done it to other people, it's probably not about China. So he's done that. But then he's going to say to them, right, you want this tariff to be lifted, you need to decouple from China like we are doing. So he is trying to force other countries to decouple from China. So his thinking is, we're going to try and isolate China economically, because they know that if they're going to do force on force, which is obviously, I'm not ruling that out, that would be the absolute last option. It is going to be a mutually assured destruction, because they both have nuclear weapons. So we are going to try other means of doing it. We have tried sanctions. We are now going to try and decouple. And if we decouple, hopefully then we will just crash everything down and restart. Destroy China, but we're not going to be as affected when we have decoupled as now. If this destruction happens now, we are vulnerable because our economies are interlinked. So I think that the sanctions is put on all of these other countries is a way of bargaining to say, right, we will take away these sanctions, but you need to decouple from China. So again, China, not my word, it's Trump's word, it's Hesget's word, it's Mark Rubio, it's all of Biden and all the American officials. They have said repeatedly, the only country that is able to challenge American hegemony is China, and therefore they want China destroyed. They want China to go down because they have to remain at the top. And the Ukraine war, the whole idea of the Ukraine war was to weaken Russia, balkanize it, break it up into pieces, so that American corporations can go there and extract all of its resources. Once Russia is out, they can do the same thing to China. That's as well as Iran. This is what they're trying to do. So they're trying to weaken all the potential adverse, allies of China and isolate China. So they're trying it in different ways. I don't think that they will succeed. Thank you.
I mean, I'll just, because again, I'm just looking at the clock. But if people are enjoying it, I guess we can crack on a little bit longer. But the thing is, we're talking about two things. We're talking about one, China's an enemy of America, where there's targeted approaches to ensure that China is not successful in its bid to become an economic powerhouse or the economic powerhouse.
Isn't it bizarre? And isn't it astonishing and shocking that we live in a world where a people have decided to call another people an enemy, a threat, a systemic danger to their way of life, only because they are trading and succeeding?
Yeah, but
and that is normalized.
Everyone does that.
Normalized.
But it is. The reality is, it is perfectly normal. Or even organizations.
So is it normal? No, is it normal that in Nigeria, in Africa, in Asia, do you hear the Indians saying that China is a threat to them? Do you hear China?
You're not looking at. You need to look at this from an entity perspective, right? The way we see these things
the world has gone mad.
No, it's not.
Madness has been normalized.
No, this is normal, and I'll tell you why. You have a bank. Banks would say, this is an example we've seen on TV all the time.
We are dealing with the people that have got entrenched superiority complex and cannot accept that somebody else has won.
Let me explain it. So you have McDonald's and Burger King and Pepsi and Coca-Cola. They often do adverts where they are attacking each other. to say you are trash, I am better, you are trash, I am
It doesn't
better.
mean you go and use a bomb and destroy.
Hold on, I'll get to that. All these, and I need to call them entities because that's what they are. Entities operate within the boundaries of the rules of engagement within that confinement. For example, women tend to, and you know this being from the medical profession, both of you, men tend to be more aggressive in the expression of dissatisfaction or in the expression of setting boundaries. They tend to be more physically aggressive. Women tend to be more verbally and more socially aggressive. A woman is more likely to go for attacking someone's social character and go and say, that woman, do you know she's bad, she's this, she's that, that. Men are more likely to punch. I'm not saying that, all women do this or all men, but that's not relevant. But that tends to happen. Now, the rules and the boundaries are quite strict-ish, or they were until we start getting to things like Me Too and all these kind of things where women are coming out to say things that were well beyond things that would just affect you socially. They would often end up with people in prison, in jail, having monetary issues, affecting their career, etc. It's the same thing. I don't see any difference in this. We're talking now about the entity of a country. What are the bounds around how countries can attack each other? Well, the bounds include nuclear weapons. The bounds include having some allies and then utilizing your militaristic force to enforce what it is that you require. In some cases, it also includes social and verbal attack of character to reduce. It's the same thing.
Ross, we've been so abused, brutalized, raped, murdered, exploited that we are adopting the norms, the values, and the uncivilized behavior of those that have oppressed and brutalized us. That's all we are doing. And if you listen out there, if we keep quiet and listen out there, we'll find out that the ones brutalizing are the ones complaining of being threatened. The ones exploiting are the ones finding threats everywhere. The ones bombing are the ones finding strength everywhere. And we are joining this echo of a traumatized people to amplify the narcissism and psychopathy of our oppressors.
Yeah, agreed.
And we need to step back from it.
Yeah,
I'm not disagreeing with you.
What is China? China shares boundary with India, with Pakistan, with Afghanistan. Why are they not the ones saying they are threatened?
Yeah.
Why are they the ones saying? Why are they the ones saying let's open up, let's trade, let's arrange win-win situations? Let me build a bridge for you. Yeah. Why are they the ones saying it?
And then you've got the country that is
why is it the one that is using so much force, that has the most military bases, that has the most money, that has the most ships, that drops the most bombs, that have the most drones? Why is it the one? Why are they the one that have a need for safety?
You're talking about a country that is not even geographically located there, right? That is like across the Pacific,
10,000 miles away. America is across oceans. It's in West Asia, talking about its security, talking about threats to it, talking about its interests.
Okay.
And then we are here normalizing that psychopathic behavior about an oppressor. So this is like
let's confusion. Farouk, wait. Farouk, I think you're confused about my position. I'm not saying that America is the right country doing the right things in the right way to deliver success and happiness to us all. I'm not saying that in any fashion. Personally, I don't even like capitalism. I am not a fan of democracy. We've had this conversation already. I don't like democracy. I think democracy is crap. It's a useless system that doesn't work. I think capitalism is good for people like me because I will take advantage of the tools that happen to have as just genetically and also from my background. They're useful for me to be successful and exploit others. Yes, it works, but it's a terrible system. That's my view about it. I'm not saying America is great and it's all nice and dandy and a fantastic country or whatever. What I'm saying is I don't see any evidence for China being any different. I don't see China being any better, being at the top of the hegemony versus America. It would be different, but I don't see it being better. That's my That is the core of my argument here.
Okay, well, I think we
Yeah.
can agree to disagree.
Yes.
Let's put it that way.
I think the two graphic images of what I've been ranting about this evening that I want us and our viewers to
Tiananmen
reflect on.
Square?
You know when that policeman had his knee on George Floyd's neck
Yep.
and he was begging for his mama and he was
Mhm.
saying he couldn't breathe.
Yeah.
Imagine that policeman saying, "Hey guys, I feel threatened. Hey guys, I fear for my life.
Yeah.
Hey guy, he's a threat."
Yeah.
That's one picture I want us to think about. Another picture is imagine Gaza today,
Mhm.
leveled to rubble. But the one leveling it talks about an existential threat to it, talks about the need for security, talks about fear for himself. That's how we've been educated in this world. That's how the strong, the powerful, the West have brought us all up, such that we end up amplifying their fears. We've been so traumatized. We've got that knee on our neck that we now say, hey, actually, he's scared. That's why he's got his knee on our neck. That's why he's got a base next to me. That's why we got China surrounded. China will be worse than him. That's why he's having to do this. That's how twisted that thinking and that reality has been imposed on us. And we need to begin to unpack it and understand it for what it is.
It's projection. I think the fear that if another country becomes stronger than them, they are going to treat them the way they've treated others. So they know how badly they've treated other people, that they are scared that they're going to have the same treatment.
I mean, the reality is, with that, I just have two words: Tiananmen Square. It's just that's what it is. I mean, China has done their own fair share of the exact same kind of brutality against the people themselves, and then I have no reason to believe that China. We don't even can talk about Taiwan. We don't even need to go that deep. It's clear that China has the exact same proclivities toward violence that the West has, and even in more exaggerated fashion.
So what about Tiananmen Square? Because again, okay, so this is Western propaganda, which is that they are going to try and take the country that they perceive as their enemy. They're going to try, because they always have to manufacture consent from the media that they control, to be able to start to say, this is why we are going to war against this country. This is why we're going to impose sanctions on this country. They always do that, right? They always use the excuse of but you're going to be taking advice or taking the news from people who sold you weapons of mass destruction.
But why are you assuming I'm taking that perspective? Why the initial assumption?
What happened in Tiananmen Square?
Thank you.
What about it?
What happened in Tiananmen Square?
It was essentially a crackdown on protests that included violence. That's all. It doesn't need to be anything more than that. It doesn't need to be about the numbers. It doesn't need to be about anything else. There's a crackdown on protests using violence with government vehicles and government. The vehicle by V, I don't mean cars. I mean the instruments.
Have you seen the crackdown of American government against?
I don't care.
Against Gaza. Have you seen that? Or Palestine?
I don't. You can't compare. It's like saying, okay, well, this guy is beating up that kid. Well, did you see the way that other guy was beating up that other kid? It's like it doesn't matter. They're beating up the kid.
No.
That's the main thing.
No. I only say that to point to the fact that there is double standard. There is hypocrisy, right? The West has a habit of projecting and lying. So this is the other thing. It's really very difficult to trust anything, not even your own education that you've been given.
China themselves are giving the numbers about Tiananmen Square. They gave their own rendition. If you marry that up against the official, government's always going to lie. You marry that up against the external reporting factors. It doesn't change the fact that brutality was established. But we're going into detail. We can talk about this in another podcast.
China is an independent country. 1 second. China is an independent country. If it feels that there's a threat, especially if there are people. 1 second. You know about color revolutions, right? You know that these revolutions are normally sponsored by a foreign country. The idea is to destabilize and overthrow your government. If your country perceives that is what is happening, do you feel that the government has a duty to stop that?
And to add to this, we
depends on
can go and say that because Nigeria, there was the Zaria Shia massacre, and there was Lekki SARS massacre by the military. So therefore, Nigeria is like America. That's bizarre.
No, but I'm sorry.
That's bizarre.
No.
We are talking about how people have behaved in the international scene, and you're looking at a country that has destroyed half a dozen countries in our lifestyle. Libya is gone, Syria is gone, Iraq bombed, Afghanistan bombed, massive invasions, trillions spent. We were comparing industrial violence with suppression of a protest. Both are bad behavior. I'll give it to. I'll concede that. But what are we talking about? We're talking about countries that assassinated Lumumba, removed the unelected president in Iran. These are things admitted. And we are talking about Tiananmen Square.
I'm sorry, we're saying the same thing.
So ultimately, we're talking about how people behave.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. We're people. It doesn't matter whether it's China or America.
No, it matters. The behavior is not the same. The constraints are not the same.
Sorry?
The behavior is not the same in scale, in character, in depth, in qualitatively and quantitatively.
You just said it's the same. You just proved it's the exact same thing. The only difference is the scale and the implementation method, but it's still the same. People still behave like people everywhere. We still do the exact same things.
We have civilized people. We have barbarians. We have psychopaths. We have people with values.
We need a conversation on this one separately, but I know we're getting to the point.
I was going to suggest, I think let's agree to disagree. Is there another section that you wanted us to look at before we go? Or we've done 1 hour, 15 minutes. We
should probably just wrap this up with last thoughts, and then we can look at the next episode around what we'll be talking about, which would be, interestingly enough, it's going to be something around misogyny. This is something that is quite interesting to me personally, and I'm very interested, especially in light of the new age where everyone's talking about things like Andrew Tate and masculinity and what toxic masculinity is, the implication on our kids in schools and all of this stuff, and basically stereotypes, etc. We can have that conversation the next one, but maybe we'll just wrap up now with last thoughts around what we think about this. Jab, do you want to go first? Maybe I'll go after you.
Yeah, no, I think I've said everything. Well, in summary, what I want to say is that we do live in a global dictatorship. There is a way that the West has structured the world that we live in, and this is a world where they stay right at the top as the top predator, and right at the bottom we've got Africa. The rest of the people of the world or the countries of the world are somewhere in between. They do not want anything at all to disturb this hierarchy. And China is the one country that has the power, the ability, and the desire to change the system in a way that benefits most people of the world. I am not saying that China is altruistic. They do have interest, but I think that how I look at China, I think it's one country that wants to do win-win, which is a totally different system to the system of parasitism that has characterized the global order over the last 400, 500 years, superintended by the Western countries. So everything we're seeing around at the moment, all these wars in Ukraine, in Gaza, threats of war against Iran, Taiwan, all of these things, the whole drama theater is all about trying to contain China and destroy China and to reassert the unipolar hegemony. That is what it's all about. And I thank all our viewers for joining us today, and I hope you enjoyed it. Happy Easter to all of you, and hopefully we'll see you again.
Don't end it yet. It's not over. We still need to hear Farouk. Farouk, have you got your last thoughts?
Let's step back from and I want to invite the panelists and our viewers to step back from whether China is good or not, and think about us as Nigerians and as Africans. and what's in it for us. And to get into my thought process, I'll say let's go back 150 years. Germany, Japan, the Central Powers decided to fight. They did not get in the fight for us. They got in the fight for themselves. But as the fought, so the background is we live in a parasitic system, in a hegemonic system where we are right at the bottom. We're weak, we're not armed, we're not organized, we're not developed. But going back in history, Germany launched a war in Europe, Japan launched a war in the Far East to take over the colonial holdings from the colonial powers of the time. And initially they were very successful. Of course, the Allies came together and fought Germany, Japan and their allies and won the war. But what that did is that it weakened the tyrants, it weakened the colonialists, it weakened the powers, and ultimately weakened the British Empire, which then obviously soldiers from all over the empire went and fought for Britain. And when they came back home, awareness, enlightenment, that ultimately led to an end of direct colonialism. Okay, so that's what, from our perspective, what did Germany and Japan achieve fighting? They indirectly freed us. So forgetting about the debate of whether China is good or bad, I believe it's better. I believe it's doing things better. But forgetting about that, as Africans, in the bottom of the food chain, what does China's rise hold for us? China is setting us free, giving us alternative capital, giving us alternative technology, undermining the hegemony that has held us back, that has contributed to holding us back for 500 years, giving us alternatives, giving us hope, showing us a different path. So I would say let's all root for China, not because it is inherently good or bad, but because it exists. It is setting us free. It is putting out AI on open source. It is building ports and bridges and roads for us at lower interest rates. It is not toppling our government. It's not sabotaging us with subversive stuff. So learn Mandarin, get your kids to learn Mandarin, engage with the evolving landscape. Beware that nobody is coming for your interest. Prioritize your interest, but understand that China's success is directly linked to our freedom. China is liberating the world. Thank you all. Happy Easter.
Happy Easter indeed. I think my final points are really just taking the couple of things. So the first thing is really just the concept that America is more autarkic based on their behavior. Autarky basically being a ban on all international trade, so you can focus on domestic production. America is moving down that route, which means they're not competing directly with external factors. They're focusing on themselves. They might be attacking specific individuals, but they've only been attacking, from what I've seen, China, who has been the only country to sit down and say, I'm attacking you back. So I don't see any specific reason. The calculation that they use, the formula that they use to determine the tariff was very, very basic, and it applied evenly across everybody. That's the first thing. I don't see anything around the expectation around how the US has been interacting that's any different from any historical predecessor around how countries and how organizations, entities, whatever you want to call it, generally behave. Countries behave like this depending on what they are. I still stand with the idea that capitalism is parasitism. I think China shows a good example of that. You see the poorest there with their factories, etc. They're really struggling in terms of financial gain and capability. We're struggling in that space. But we don't talk about that because that's not important, is it? I think that China has a very passive sort of approach toward getting into political control, and we see quite a lot of this in what's happening in Africa. Chinese people are getting into quite important industries in Nigeria, whether we're talking about mining, and I'm saying this from personal experience, to other things within that space. I think finally, I think we're basically slaves who are swapping masters. That's my opinion about this one. that we're swapping out one master for another. It's still massa. We're still swapping one for another. America is a master in its own way, in its own right, with its own way of controlling the world. And then swapping out for China is not going to make things better. It's just going to make things differently. Even the final thoughts that you said around things like DeepSeek, they've given us DeepSeek as open. They've given us DeepSeek as open source. Well, what difference does that make when a lot of it, when in most cases it trains off your data, which OpenAI and the more American-centric AI tools, models, and infrastructures don't. So they take your data and they tell you openly, you put your data and you're going to take this to make our stuff better. It's the Chinese way. They take your IP, they take your information, they take your knowledge, and they build a knowledge-based economic model, which I don't think personally is much different from the American militaristic approach. And finally, the final thing, and this has been a topic that was brought up here, was around how China is not violent. And I'm like, well, the answer to that is that China is not violent yet. That does not necessarily mean that there's any indication that China will not be violent, especially when we look at the history that they have been able to do within their own country. They've done lots of violent different things within the country at micro scales and also at scales that they've probably clamped down. We don't know. I have no idea. But the ones that we know about are pretty similar to what the West does in terms of the execution. So that's my final thoughts. I don't think we should swap them out. I think they're the same. I don't think there's any difference. I think capitalism as a root should be kicked out. Democracy should be completely substituted for a different kind of political model, and then we should head for the future, in a future that does not involve China, America, the EU, or any specific block of countries running things. We need to have a proper structural approach to how we deal with the global geopolitical arrangements. And with that, I think we can call this a day. It's been a bit of a wrap. It's been an interesting conversation. This was completely freestyle. We didn't expect this to go how it went. But it was a good conversation. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's been great. Thank you all for joining us if you joined us today. And then we're looking forward to catching you next week. This is us signing out, Misaligned. Peace out.
Thank you.